The list of the highest paid college football coaches is out, and there are some surprises, both good and bad, of who the top 25 paid college football coaches are in America. And I don't want to, number 22 will shock you, but there are some surprises, like I said, both on who gets paid that much and who doesn't get paid all that much. It's today's edition of the Daily Huddle. I'm Garrett C. Wright. Thanks for making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. Hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you're getting all of our college football content. If you're listening on the podcast, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping us get in front of more college football fans. You take a look at the top 25 paid coaches in America, and this is data polled and provided to USA Today. And I think it's important to note also that it's just strictly public school coaches. One of the advantages of being a private school, there aren't a whole lot of them, but one of the advantages of being a private school, you don't have to tell everybody how much you're paying your coach, both good and bad. But this is all publicly available information. Nick Saban is obviously number one, $11.4 million per year. Dabo Swinney's number two at just shy of 11 million. Kirby Smart's just shy of 11 million. Ryan Day's just over 10 million. Mel Tucker, God rest his Michigan State soul, was the number 5 coach at just over 10 million bucks. Rounding out the top 10 was Brian Kelly, Jimbo Fisher, Mark Stoops at Kentucky, Josh Heupel at Tennessee, and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, all making between $9 and just under $10 million a year. So there are some takeaways there in that top 10. And if you're listening on the podcast, the 11 through 15, James Franklin, Penn State, Jim Harbaugh, Michigan, Luke Fickell, Wisconsin, Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State, and Mike Norvell at Florida State are all between $8.5 and $7.3 million. Billy Napier at Florida, Brent Venables at Oklahoma, Kirk Ferentz at Iowa, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Hugh Freeze are 16 through 20, all between $7.2 and $6.5 million. And rounding out the top 25, Brett Bielema, Sam Pittman, Kyle Whittingham at Utah, Shane Bieber at South Carolina, Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, and PJ Fleck at Minnesota are all between $6.5 and $6 million per year. So what are the takeaways? There are 8 SEC coaches in the top 10. 8. If you throw out Mel Tucker, God rest his soul. You get Bama, Georgia, LSU, A&M, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. 7 of the top 10. I beg your pardon. 7 of the top 10. And it's 7 of the top 10 and 11 of the top 25 coaches highest paid in the SEC and in America. So there are some takeaways there. The Big Ten has 8 of the top 25. So 19 of the top 25 highest paid coaches, public school coaches in America, reside in the Big Ten or the SEC. There's then 2 each from the ACC, Pac-12, and Big 12. The problem for those schools and those conferences is the 2 Big 12 schools on the list are Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Well, Oklahoma's leaving the conference. Problem for the Pac-12 is their highest paid coaches on the list are Utah and Oregon, who are both leaving the conference. The ACC, the 2 highest paid coaches in the league are Clemson and Florida State, 2 schools who have not been shy about their intention of wanting to leave the conference. So one of the questions that looking at those numbers leads you to is this a chicken or the egg situation? Did the ACC, Pac-12, and Big 12 fall behind because they don't have the TV money to pay their coaches as much as the SEC and Big 10 do? Or did those conferences fall behind simply because they failed to pay their coaches top dollar? And that is why you've seen the commitment from, if I were to ask you, walking down the street, if Kentucky, Michigan State, South Carolina, and Minnesota paid their coaches enough money to be in the top 25 highest paid coaches in America, Would you say yes or no to that? I don't think you'd say yes, that Kentucky pays their football coach the 8th most money in college football. You wouldn't believe that. And if I was to ask you if Kentucky paid their football coach nearly $2 million more than Florida State did, or if Minnesota paid their coach more than Texas does, would you buy that? No, probably not. So I find that interesting that there has to be a chicken and the egg there. Either the investment came before the money or the money came before the investment. That Clemson was willing to just pay Dabo Swinney $10 million a year in hopes that someday, somehow, some way, that would lead to larger TV revenue or more success. And it has. But when you look at this list, and 19 of the 25 are in the Big Ten or SEC, what does that say about the ACC, the Big 12, the Pac-12? I think it's hard to angle for we're as committed to this as everybody else is if you are in the Big 12. That you have 2 coaches on the list and one of them is leaving your conference for the SEC at the end of this season. I think it's really difficult to say we're on the same playing field. We're on the level with everybody else. Well, are you? Because you got one guy in the top 25 being paid like the coaches at 2 other big-time conferences. Now, that's not to say that some of these guys, like some of the guys in the Big 10, Big 12, either don't deserve that much or are overpaid. But when you look at the numbers, just the sheer grouping of, okay, it's the Big Ten, SEC, and everybody else, it's difficult, I think, for the ACC to say, oh, yeah, we're still a Power 5 conference. We still treat this like everybody else. Do you? Because I don't see it here. The numbers don't bear that out. So what leg do you have to stand on in that case? What also stands out to me are the guys who are not on the list. And part of that is somewhat new hires and somewhat conservative hires. And not even conservative hires, conservative contracts, in that we're going to hire you. If things go well, you're going to find yourself on this list. And there are, I think, 3 guys that jump off the page to me that are in line for jumping on to this list. The first one is Steve Sarkisian at Texas. He is going to get a gigantic raise this offseason. The University of Texas is supposed to be on this list. If I were to ask you who the top paying programs are in America, I don't think it would take you very long to get to Texas. Certainly, you wouldn't get past 26 on this list. You would not. It's just, that's basic fact. You would not be staying. If I was walking man on the street interviews, if I asked you, did Michigan State, Kentucky, Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota, and South Carolina, and Utah, and Missouri pay their head coach more than Texas does, you wouldn't say yes to that. So Steve Sarkisian has Texas playing as good as anybody in America right now. I think there's an argument to be made that they should be the number 1 ranked team in the country. In the BCS, which, obviously still matters, they would be the number 1 team. If you're the number 1 team in America at a program that should be on this list but isn't because they basically gave you a, like, hey, we'll pay you this amount if you do well, you're going to get fat stacks of cash on the second contract and the contract extension, Steve Sarkisian is in line for a fat extra payday. He's going to get a gigantic raise this offseason. It's just a matter of how much. How far up does he propel himself on this list? Because I think it'd be really simple for Steve Sarkisian to say, A&M's paying Jimbo Fisher 9.1, and we're better than they are. I think it would be a really simple argument to make. You're going to walk into whoever you're negotiating with and say, you're going to let everybody know that Texas A&M has more money than you do to pay their coaches? Well, Daddy going to make some money, and Steve Sarkisian's going to get a big pay raise. And if Texas isn't going to pump him up to that level, somebody else is gonna. Because I've made this argument on the podcast before, and one of my good friends, Dimitri Ravanos, who's works for Barrett Sports Media, wrote a column this week about how essentially he believes Nick Saban, this is the end of the line, and he's going to College Game Day in 2024. I don't know. I think where there's some smoke, there's some fire to that maybe. But I believe that it's Nick Saban's final year coaching the Alabama Crimson Tide. And they're already paying the top paid coach in America. If they drop Steve Sarkisian down to $10 million a year, it's a savings for them. So somebody's going to pay Steve Sarkisian a fat stack of cash this offseason. It's just a determiner of whether it's going to be Alabama or Texas. I would lean towards Texas, but you got to do what you got to do to get that bag. I think Steve Sarkisian's willing to do it. So Steve Sarkisian is the first name that jumps out that he's not on the list, but probably should be. I think Kalen DeBoer at Washington is in a pretty similar spot. Now, not to the level of going from not on the list to being a top 5 or top 8 paid coach in America, but he's in a similar spot in that, one, Washington is going to have a good year and is already in the midst of a good year alongside Texas. Now, I don't know that Washington's at the level of Texas. I don't know that Washington is at the level of that appears to be a college football playoff national championship caliber team. I think they're close there. I think they're a contender to win the Pac-12. I don't know if they are at the level of definitive national title contender. I don't know. But it's pretty clear Washington's going to win at least 9 games, probably 10, maybe 11, maybe 12, maybe 13, maybe 14. But they're going to be right there beside Texas and having a really good year. And Kalen DeBoer is underpaid. He's not on this list. Is Kalen DeBoer more imperative to his football program than Eli Drinkwitz? Probably. Sam Pittman? Yeah. So I think, and also helping Washington is they're in that group of, we're moving to a new conference, and if you want to see us compete in this new conference, how are you going to pay me, the 9th highest paid guy in the league, 10th highest paid guy, really, once you add in Oregon, and we don't get to see what Lincoln Riley gets paid at USC. Conceivably, he's in the top 25. So you're going to make me the 11th the highest paid coach in the conference, 12th highest paid coach in the conference? He's going to have a leg to stand on, and I think he's going to be as likely, if not more likely, of a hot coaching commodity, because Texas is, like Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Texas is a destination job. It absolutely is. And so there are very few jobs that you would leave Texas for, if there are any. Steve Sarkisian might not even entertain going back to Alabama unless they're dropping fat stacks of cash on him. Washington can be a destination job, but I don't think definitively is a destination job. For a guy like Kalen DeBoer, it might be a 100% slam dunk destination job. He's from, the western half of America. Also, he's familiar with the Big Ten. And if Washington is not willing to put him on this list of the top 25, but Michigan State was at number 5 with Mel Tucker, I think Kalen DeBoer is in for a big fat raise this offseason. And similarly to Steve Sarkisian, it is a who's going to be the one to pay him. Is it going to be Washington or is it somebody else? And that's all that matters at the end of the day. And finally, he can ask for the money, but I don't know that Deion Sanders really has a clear path to getting on this list outside of having to go somewhere else. And that's always been one of the things I've struggled with Deion Sanders of everybody's good. Everybody with a coaching opening, darn near everybody with a coaching opening this offseason is going to at least in private say, what about Deion Sanders? They're going to have that conversation. They're going to kick it around because they're going to say, can we lure that guy here? Is he going to bring the publicity, the notoriety, the attention to our program that we want and need? And would he be willing to leave Colorado to do it? Supposedly, when Colorado hired him and he said, hey, I think it's $5.5 million. And they said, okay, we don't have the money, but we'll get it somehow. Well, it's worked out for them. They switched conferences. They sold out the spring game. They sold out season tickets. Got celebrities standing on the sidelines. Things have gone well for Colorado since they've hired Deion Sanders. He can ask for more money, and he might deserve and be entitled to more money. Because if I'm Deion Sanders, I look at the final 6 or 7 guys on that list and go, you don't think I'm worth more than Brett Bielema? You don't think I'm worth more than Sam Pittman, Shane Beamer, Eli Drinkwitz, PJ Fleck? You don't think I'm worth that? Depending on how Florida's season goes, you don't think I'm worth more than Billy Napier? Because I'm here to tell you, Billy Napier gets the can. Despite Deion being a Seminole, there's going to be some people in Florida going, I think we might need to hire Deion Sanders. So he can ask for more money, and he might be entitled to it. He might deserve already a raise from what he's got at Colorado. But I don't know that he'll get it. And I think that's a hell of a spot for an athletic department to be in, that we're just going to take the risk and hire you. And we don't have the money, but we're going to get it. We'll figure it out. We'll find some way to get you that cash. When he first got hired, I don't know that you're just going to fall into it by the time he needs a raise after the 2023 season. And I think, and I've mentioned this before on the show, that like it always used to piss me off that every year you'd be watching some bowl game and the bottom line would flash, be like, Brian Kelly has a reported interest in taking the Philadelphia Eagles job or whatever bullcrap NFL job was out there, strictly because he just was looking for a raise from Notre Dame. And at some point, you just got to say, like, listen, I'm paying you as much as I'm going to pay you. If that ain't good enough for you, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We'll see you. It was every year. Brian Kelly's flirting with the NFL. Oh, Notre Dame has announced a contract extension for Brian Kelly. It's going to see him get paid $1.1 million every year. And it's just annoying. Every year. And I don't think Deion Sanders is going to be in that camp. But if he would absolutely have a case to pound the table for, listen, look what I did for your program, even the first 3 weeks of the season. Colorado got more publicity than it did in the past 2 decades in the first 3 weeks of the college football season because Deion had him 3-0. So he can ask for more money. He might be justified and deserving of more money. I don't know how much more money he can get is the problem. And one of my final takeaways is, according to all of the numbers put out by USA Today, Nick Saban at his $11.4 million payday makes more than the Sun Belt coaches combined, and there are 14 of them. That is a hell of a statistic. Is that, and I think that, like, obviously no like coordinators are on this list of making $6 million or anything like that. But for a really long time, the pathway to being a Power 5 head coach was, there were kind of two pathways. And one of them included being a Group of 5 head coach at a Sunbelt school, at a MAC school, what have you. And you succeed there after for a couple of years and you get hired at a Power 5 school. That pathway is closing because those schools can't afford to pay what a Power 5 coordinator can pay. And really, if you could be a Power 5 coordinator and make $1.8 million, doesn't that sound a whole lot better than being a Group of 5 head coach for $800,000? Excuse me. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? Like, why want all of the headaches and all of the responsibility and all that stuff that comes with being a head coach in Group of 5 school, which generally are in much smaller, somewhat less desirable locales than big Group of Power 5. Geez, I'm crying. Power 5 schools. You can get paid $1.8 million to call the offense for a Power 5 school, or get paid $800,000 to be the head coach of a G5 school. That's a pretty simple decision to make. So if that pathway closes, it's only going to widen the gap, because Group of 5 schools got the benefit of getting really good young up-and-coming coaches at a huge discount, because the pay was somewhat equivalent whether you were an offensive coordinator or the head coach at like offensive coordinator at P5 or head coach at a G5, that the pay was somewhat close. Well, now the pay's not, and you see Kent State's head coach left to go be the offensive coordinator at Colorado. Toledo's head coach the last couple of years has flirted with taking the offensive coordinator job at Miami. Why? It's a lot of money, and it's a probably faster path to being a Power 5 head coach, truthfully. So that gap is going to widen if the Group of 5 schools don't do something about it. And I think you see the exasperation there of Nick Saban at $11.4 million makes more than the Sun Belt combined. While it is funny, it is also like, okay, how do you get out of that? And how do you go back and get the benefit of having really good coaches who are kind of getting on the job training without all the expectations, and you can pay them, a pretty penny that you think is a pretty penny. You get your fan base energized, they get to build a resume, and they go on to bigger and better things eventually. I don't know how you close that gap. And that's the one concern I have, is that when one guy is making more than an entire conference, it's like, oh man, that really shows that gulch is pretty wide between the haves and the have-nots. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Again, thanks for making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. We certainly appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the college football content, whether it's recruiting, the Daily Huddle podcast, press conferences, highlights, all that stuff. Hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on a podcast, drop a 5-star review. We'll read them here on the show. We'll catch you tomorrow right here on the Daily Huddle on Saturday Glory.